Hello friends, it's been a while. I'm Remington, welcome. It's been quite a while, like I said, since I filmed a video. That's for a variety of reasons. I hope that is not too distracting. I'm currently in a greenhouse, because it's the only place I have to myself, where I can film and talk without people hearing me, and I cannot stand the fact, or the thought of people hearing me while I'm filming. It makes me incredibly self-conscious. So this is where I'm gonna go for the foreseeable future. Anyway, I've moved several times over the past year. I've switched jobs. I've had many other different things going on which got in the way of me filming videos. But I didn't stop reading. I never stopped reading. I slowed down, that's for sure. I definitely didn't read as much as I did in 2023, but I kept reading. And I want to talk about the books that I read. I'm going to rank them in order of enjoyment. It's going to be a pretty rough order. I always keep a list of a rough ranking of books after I read them. But it always changes. It's never the same as when I originally rate them. And even when I was putting them together, I was questioning where to put things, and I might change things up a little bit here, especially with my favorite book, because the two top ones, either of them could be my favorite on any given day, I think. But anyway, I want to start with the DNFs. I wrote them down because I don't have them out here with me. And I kind of separate my DNFs into two different groups. One group being, I didn't finish them because I'm done with them and I don't really have any interest on ever picking them up again. And then there's another group which is, the vibes weren't right, I guess. It wasn't a bad book or anything. It just, the vibes weren't right. I didn't feel right about continuing to read it. So I just moved on to something else. The only one in that second group that I can remember is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. I didn't get very far in it this time, and I've tried to read it before as well. Both times I really liked it. I thought it was very well written and very compelling. I particularly remember the last paragraph of the fourth chapter, I think, being... it blew me away both times I read it, and I had to stop for a second and was just wow, that was really well written. But for whatever reason, both times, it didn't, I don't know, the vibes were off, and I just had to move on to something else. I'm going to read it, though, and I'm sure that I'm going to like it based off of the parts of it that I've read before, but I don't exactly know what happened, but I just felt like I had to move on. Anyway, the DNFs, that I stopped because I wasn't enjoying them. The first one was Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. I've read two other books by Frederick Bachman and liked them both quite a bit. A Man Called Uwe was my favorite of his that I read last year, I think. And it had some over-the-top characters in it. But overall, it still very much worked for me. But Anxious People just has too many over-the-top characters, and the whole setting is over-the-top, and that's on purpose. But it was too much for me. It was too cheesy, and I didn't jive with it. So I got about halfway through before I decided to put it down. And then the next one was Normal People by Sally Rooney. This one just, I don't know, it was fine. I just wasn't enjoying it at all. The characters were whatever. I don't think they're meant to be particularly likable, at least from the part that I read. And nothing was really happening, so I just lost interest and moved on. Then also there was Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, which was good, the part of it that I read. I think I got about halfway in this one as well. But I just couldn't find the interest to pick it up again. I didn't feel like it was really going anywhere. And I felt the overarching theme of the narrative of basically Jane falling in love with the only man that's ever shown her any kind of kindness being uncompelling completely. I had no interest in where it was going, and I don't really ever care to pick it back up again. And then the final DNF was Good Omens by Neil Gaiman. I was doing a buddy read of this with my girlfriend, and neither of us were really enjoying it. Like, I think we were both just continuing to read it just because we were buddy reading it. Like, if either of us were reading it on our own, we would have put it down already because we just weren't into it. Oh, and it's also written by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. Anyway, we both weren't really enjoying it that much, and then the first allegations about Neil Gaiman came out, and we were just like, all right, we're just going to cut our losses. We weren't really enjoying it anyway. And so we just stopped. But that's it as far as books that I didn't finish. Now, in a pretty rough ranking of how I enjoyed the books, let's talk about the ones that I did finish. The worst book of the year and also the first book of the year was a gift to me by a girl that I was going out with in 2023 and at the very beginning of 2024, and it was a Christmas gift to me from her. Divergent by Veronica Roth. And I read it like right away as like kind of a way to show appreciation that she got me a book for Christmas. And it just really wasn't good. It's basically a Hunger Games adjacent kind of book, like dystopian teen thriller. And I just thought it was so full of like teen angst. It didn't feel original to me in any way. I didn't feel like it was well written. I did finish it, but only because I was seeing this girl, and that relationship didn't last too much longer. Nothing to do with the book, really, just because like we didn't mesh. But yeah, it was. I didn't like it. I only finished it because I was interested in that girl at that time. So yeah, I think I don't know, 1.5, maybe 2 stars max for Divergent. I didn't enjoy it, yeah. Then after that was Dark Matter. I didn't read it right after that, but like next in the ranking is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. And this one, I read this in like 2, maybe 3 days. I think I read the last like 150 pages in one sitting. Just because it's a thriller that really makes you want to turn the page. Blake Crouch is extremely good at that. But looking back on my read after I had finished it, I felt like the twists and turns were very cheap. And it was only compellingly written not because the story necessitated it, but because Blake Crouch just wanted you to feel like you had to turn the page. It's a story about a man who gets trapped in like a multiverse traveling machine to try and reconnect with his wife. It gets very over the top at times, and the main character, even though he's a genius, like he's just making incredibly foolish decisions throughout the book. Which, you know, when you're in a high stress environment and your life is falling apart around you, that's fine. I'm not, too harsh on the main character itself. I just felt that it used emotion cheaply just for the sake of evoking a feeling. So I'd give Dark Matter by Blake Crouch like 2 stars maybe. Then we have Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. This one came highly recommended to me by the From the Heart YouTube channel, and so I expected it to be very good when I went into it, and it just bored me all the way through, to be perfectly honest with you. The first chapter, or the first part of it, I don't remember if it's multiple chapters or whatever, but the first part of it I thought was very good, and I was very excited for like a cozy-ish sci-fi adventure, which is what it felt like it was gonna be. And then it just devolved into a sci-fi fantasy time travel mess that I didn't care for. I didn't like any of the characters in it except for the first character, who isn't really involved very much. It's been a long time since I've read it, so I'm struggling to remember my exact thoughts on it. But yeah, I just I didn't like it. Like, it was fine. It wasn't poorly written. I don't remember it being poorly written. I don't know, so I'd probably give it like 2.5 stars if I'm feeling generous. Then we had Ethics in the Real World by Peter Singer. This one was fine. I just felt like it was so incredibly surface level. It's a collection of essays by Peter Singer about different philosophical or moral or ethical topics. And I just felt that it was so very surface level that if you knew anything about the topic of the essay already, you really didn't have anything to glean. Like, it's written for somebody who's never given any thought to the topics before, and if you have, then you don't really have anything to gain from it. Like, it's just so incredibly surface level. It's fine for what it is, but I didn't really know that it wasn't gonna go deep on any of the subjects. I didn't expect it to, be incredibly profound with how many subjects there are and, how short the book is for the number of them, but I expected a lot more from it, and I didn't get it. So I'm also going to give Ethics in the Real World 2.5 stars. Then we had The Red Pony by John Steinbeck, which was fine. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. It's about a young boy who's raising a pony, and him basically dealing with the fact that life is difficult sometimes, and sometimes things don't go the way you want them to, even though you did everything right. And I like the message from it, but if I'm being perfectly honest, the book was just kind of boring and a little melodramatic at times, and I didn't feel very connected with the characters. None of them... Well, there was an older gentleman in here who was like kind of the mentor, and I liked him, even though he kind of failed at times. No fault of his own, just because he thought that he could do more than he actually could. I like the overall message of it, and I like that character, but other than that, like, if it were 100 pages longer, and it were just, like, the same all the way through, I don't think I would have finished it. Just because I wasn't eager to turn the page at any point. So I'd give The Red Pony... I think it barely falls into 3-star territory. I could change my mind on that at any given moment. And then there's also The Stranger by Albert Camus. I don't know how you pronounce the last name. I've heard it pronounced a bunch of different ways. I don't have a lot of thoughts on this one. It was one of the first books that I read in 2024, and it was fine when I read it. The main character is just very apathetic and doesn't care about anything, and that's the point. That's what the book is about. I feel bad that that's all that I have to say about it, but yeah, that's as much as I can share about it. Okay, but this next one, Morning Star by Pierce Brown. This is one that I had a lot of thoughts on, and I talked about it in one of my videos last year. I think one of my first ones. I really didn't like this one. I thought that the ending was just so terrible. It was so cheap. Okay, let me describe what Morning Star is. I'm doing a bad job of describing what these books are. It's the final book in the Red Rising trilogy, which is a sci-fi space opera trilogy about a kid named Darrow, who is rising up through the class ranks in his society and trying to overthrow the classist system of it for his people, who are on the bottom and are basically slaves. Well, not basically, they are slaves. And in this final book, I'm not going to spoil anything, but a lot of twists and turns happen, and it's very much a page turner. It's designed to like keep you gripped all the way through with just how much action and how much stuff is going on. And this is the book where I was finally just realizing that the twists were coming just for twist's sake, just to keep the plot like high octane, I guess, just to keep you turning the pages, just to keep you interested. And when I realized that, and like realized how little a lot of the twists actually mattered, it just very much cheapened the whole thing for me. And the ending specifically, I didn't think it was well written. I thought it was very clumsy. I thought the way that it happened was very unrealistic and could have gone wrong in so many ways. Could have, and honestly should have, gone wrong in so many ways. The fact that they made it out the way that they did is kind of just insane. And after I finished this, I really didn't want to continue the series, because there's 3 books out currently and another one coming out supposedly later this year, that follow the same universe, the same characters, just like in the future a little bit. And I've heard that those are even better, but I had little to no interest after finishing this one, just because it left such a bad taste in my mouth. I do think that I'm going to go back and read them now, because my anger has kind of mellowed since it's been almost a year since I've read this. It might have actually been a complete year since I've read this, since I'm making this video so late in the month. But yeah, I am going to continue the series. I just hope that it is less cheap than this book felt to me. Yeah, I'm going to change this. The Red Pony was definitely better in my mind than Morning Star. And so was The Stranger, honestly. Morning Star, 2.5 stars. The Stranger, also 2.5 stars because I didn't care about it. And then The Red Pony, 3 stars. And that could change again at any moment. I'm not going to change it in this video, but it could change at any moment if you were to ask me my thoughts on any given day. Oh wow, I'm taking a long time and I've got a lot of books to get through. I should probably speed up a little bit. I don't know how much I'm going to edit this down. Next up we have The Employees by Olga Ravin. This book was very popular for a while last year. I saw a bunch of different booktubers talking about it, and that's why I picked it up. It's a sci-fi book about a spaceship with employees who are both fully human and some who are, like, I think completely cyborg. It's very cryptic in the way that it's explaining the story, because it's basically just accounts from the crew, both the cyborgs and the humans, talking about their experience on the ship and what happened. And they never fully come out and say what it is that's going on, because they're giving their accounts to, like, some kind of investigator after something happened. And so that part of it was pretty cool, like trying to piece together all the pieces, because they're also not given to you in, like, chronological order. They're just kind of thrown at you. And they have numbers, like statement 38 and like statement 83, and like they're all jumbled up, so you know, like, roughly where in the timeline that this piece of the story is coming from, but it's very much mishmashed and you never get the entire story. You kind of have to put it together for yourself, and you get enough of the story to know, like, the gist of what happened and what was going on, but it's still pretty cryptic, and you're not going to have all the answers at the end. And I thought it was fine. I didn't love it. I thought that some of the stories were really interesting and some of the concepts, but for me it was too strung along, I guess. I wanted it to not necessarily, like, be put together on a silver platter for me, but I wanted to come away feeling that I had some kind of complete story, and I didn't with this book. So that's my main dislike with it, which I don't think is necessarily a valid criticism of the book itself, because it's not trying to be that. It is distinctly trying not to be that. But I just didn't enjoy it for that reason. So I think I'd give it 3 stars. Yeah. Then we have Bill Gates' How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. And I thought that this was a pretty good surface level explanation or exploration of, I'm sorry if the noise is very distracting, but there's not too much I can do about it. Anyway, it's a pretty good exploration of the issue of climate and our responsibility to diminish our effects on our climate. It's fairly surface level, but it would be a very good introductory novel to, or not a novel, but a very good introduction to just the idea of climate change for somebody who doesn't really know much about it. It doesn't go too in depth on anything, but it gives you a pretty broad base for what you would need to know. My main criticism of it is that it is not. My main criticism of it is that it doesn't go deep enough on its criticism of political reform. And it's written by Bill Gates, who's a billionaire, so that kind of makes sense. I just don't think it calls for enough political action. It does call for some, but I don't think nearly enough. It doesn't call for the kind of reform that I think would really make a difference. It relies too much on industry to make a difference, which I think is a very big part of solving the problem. But I think it is kind of undermining probably the biggest part in the issue of climate, I think, which is why I didn't love it. I think it's fine, though. I definitely wouldn't avoid the book. I think it's, like I said, a good introductory. So I'd give it 3 stars. And then, in a pretty similar vein, we have What We Owe the Future by William McGaskill. This one is about a broad variety of topics, climate included. It's also about population morality, which personally I find the whole concept of population morality to be kind of disgusting, although it is an important conversation to have. And just different ways that we as society should be thinking about the humans in the future, because we're going to have a big effect on them based off the decisions that we're making today. Excuse me. For better and for worse, and how we need to be accountable for that. And I think it similarly falls into the same kind of issue where the solutions it gives aren't harsh enough on the current political scene, and it relies very heavily on what McGaskill calls effective altruism, which is basically rich people giving money to effective charities to try and change things, which is good, but I think that economic reform, to some degree, I don't know exactly where I stand on it, would do far more good than just rich people deciding to do good. I think that we could be a lot more effective than the change that this book calls for would do. Still pretty effective. It gives you a pretty broad base for different topics that you should be aware of and things that you can do to make a difference in the current system, and I think that that's a good thing. I don't think it goes far enough, like I said, but it is still a good thing, so I'd give it 3 stars. Okay, and then I reread The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, and I liked it a lot more this time. I thought it was a lot... there was a lot more to it this time that I noticed. There were a lot more passages that I thought were really beautiful, because the first time I read it, I just thought it was kind of boring and didn't really jive with the whole message. And I still don't like the message of it. Like, I get the allegorical take that you got to stick to your guns for what matters to you. I just don't think that the message that the book says really coincides with the message that most people take away with it, which is a more literal take on the book, which isn't necessarily right or wrong. If anything, it's more on the wrong side. I understand that. But I just think that what he was doing was foolish, and it didn't matter. I get that it mattered to him, like bringing that fish in was very important for him. And it was like who he was, and he was called to do it, he felt like. But at the same time, he was putting himself at risk, and the people he cared about, he was causing them to worry about something that ultimately didn't matter. And so that's why I think it was foolish. I think he got carried away by ambition that was unnecessary, and it caused him and people around him harm. I mean, obviously he walks away all right, but like he could have not, and he could have caused his friend, the little boy, a lot of grief. And I think that he should have considered that when he was making his choice to stay out there. I think it was very selfish. And again, I get that is a stand-in for like something that is so important to you that you cannot give any ground on it. I get the allegorical take. I think it's too reckless of a message, personally. But I did like it a lot more than I did the first time. There are some very beautiful passages on it, and particularly where he's talking about how him and the fish are there together and he's respecting the fish, like how much he appreciates it for what it is. Even though he's trying to kill it, he appreciates the struggle that the fish is going through. I thought that those reflective passages were really, really well done. So I'll give it 3.5 stars this time. Maybe if I read it again in the future, it'll crawl up to 4. Then we have Persepolis, the first part, The Story of a Childhood by Margie Strawberry. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I'm not going to look it up. I don't really remember too much of what happens in this, because I just read the second part. I just finished it like 2 weeks ago. And the crossover between what happened at the beginning of the second book and where this book ends is really hazy in my mind. So I don't know exactly where the stopping point of this book is. And that is why I'm having a hard time of giving my thoughts on it. I remember liking it when I did read it. It's just about a little girl growing up in Iran during the Iranian Revolution. So basically growing up in war, growing up with a lot of her friends and family being murdered by the government or imprisoned for quite a long time, and her journey exploring who she is and her womanhood, and trying to rebel while at the same time being true to who she is and her family. And it's very good. Especially the second part. Like I said, like I'm having a hard time remembering exactly what happens in this one. But I would recommend it. It's not a long read, and the second half is very good. So 3.5 stars, I guess, even though I'm having trouble remembering exactly what happens. I do remember my main criticism of it being that tonally it felt weird because of it's a graphic novel, and like it feels very childish in the way that the drawings are depicting things that are happening, but at the same time the things that are happening are very mature. There's a lot of bad stuff going on. So it just felt kind of tonally messy because of that. I really gotta speed up. I'm talking for too long. The Principles of Communism by Friedrich Engels. This is basically a pamphlet, but I counted it as a book. I'm curious about communism as a whole, as well as just economic theory. I'm slowly dipping my toes into it because economic theory scares me because it's pretty dense and there's a lot to it and so much disagreement on it. And so I just read this pamphlet to get a better idea of what communism is, and it left me with a lot more questions than answers. It very succinctly lays out the core tenets of communism and why Friedrich Engels thinks that it's so important. But it being so short in just laying out principles, it just left me with so many more questions that I need to answer. yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on it. So I'd give it 3.5 stars again. That's gonna be a trend for a little while. Then we had White American Youth by Christian Piccolini. This is a story, it's a memoir about Christian Piccolini and how he got sucked into a hate movement. I don't remember which city it's based in. It's maybe Boston, maybe New York, I don't remember. But basically him growing up in this city as an Italian American and him being swept into the skinhead movement and their hatred for Jews primarily, as well as just colored people in general, and how he got sucked into it and how eventually he worked his way out of it. And it's a pretty good book. I'd recommend it. It didn't blow me away, but it wasn't boring. It was moving in the ways that it needed to be. I don't know why I'm feeling kind of apathetic on it now, but like when I was reading it, it was pretty good. Not quite as good as the books that I was reading around it, but it was still pretty good. I feel harsh giving it 3.5 stars, but I just don't feel passionate about it. I don't feel like it really won anything more from me, even though like I liked it. I didn't really have any problems with it. Okay, next up, Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism by Amanda Montell. This is a good exploration of language and how it is so often used to manipulate people. And different spectrums of cultiness that the groups that she talks about falls onto. She talks about everything from the Jamestown Massacre and how harsh of a cult that was, and she compares that with different exercise cults that aren't, particularly harmful towards people, and in some ways they do a lot of good because they motivate people to get in very good health. But at the same time, they use language and different cultish methods to kind of trap people in. And it's a very good exploration of that. She talks about a bunch of different cults and different ways that they use language and other tactics to keep you in. And she has firsthand, well, I guess kind of secondhand experience because her father was involved in a cult when she was younger. It's pretty good. It doesn't go too deep into anything particular, which is why it's not higher up on the list, I think. But it was entertaining, and it was pretty educational as well. It rode the line of being entertaining and educational very, very well. But it doesn't quite reach 4-star territory for me, so still 3.5 stars. And then we have On a Sunbeam by Tilly Walden, which is another graphic novel. This one is about 2 young girls who grow up in an all-girls boarding school. I don't think that there's a single man in this book. Yeah, I don't think that there is. But basically, they're growing up in an all-girls boarding school, and they're both kind of outliers. Like, they don't have a friend group that they fit into. And so they find each other, and they develop a really sweet relationship because of that. And they get into different hijinks and stuff because one of them's kind of a troublemaker. And then a bunch of things happen. I don't need to talk about the story any more than that. It's a very sweet love and adventure story about these 2 young girls. And it's very sci-fi-esque. And very beautiful. There are some absolutely gorgeous panels in here. And the color palette throughout the book was my favorite thing about it, even though the story was very sweet. There were 3 or 4 panels that I can still remember, even though I haven't opened this book in quite a while, that I just remember being absolutely gorgeous. The main thing about the reason why it's so not at the top of my list is because the latter half of the story, the world building, as they go exploring more to, resolve the story, the world building just really, really fell flat for me. And it's definitely more of like a, it's not even young adult. Honestly, I think it's more geared towards middle grade than young adult. So this is probably a little bit of an unfair criticism, but the world building just fell so flat for me that I felt like it could have been so much more than it was, which kind of spoiled things a little bit for me, even though the main story of it is still very sweet and pretty good. But I don't feel like I could give it more than 3.5 stars because of that. I'd still really recommend it, though. And I got my younger sister a copy of it for Christmas. Okay. And then next up, the book that I feel most conflicted about is another graphic novel, Habibi by Craig Thompson. And Craig Thompson wrote my favorite book ever, which is an autobiography graphic novel about him growing up in the Midwest and his first love. And I adore that book so much. And this one is different because it's just a fictional story about an Arabic girl and the struggle that she goes through being an orphan and growing up on her own. And she goes through some truly horrible things. Like, the book is very graphic. Like, it deals with sex and prostitution and rape, and it doesn't pull many punches when it comes to that, even though it's a graphic novel. And the story of her growing up in that struggle and coming through it on the other end, and the growth that she goes through with that is very, very good and very touching, and the found family in it is amazing. The reason why I feel so conflicted about it is because the way that it depicts these things that are happening in it, it's a cartoonish art style, and so at sometimes it feels almost like it's making light of it. I feel that's not quite the right way to put it. It's not making light of it, but it feels like it's almost fetishizing these things and the way that they're depicted, and like the way that female anatomy is depicted so not like vividly, but like very beautiful, and it's given detail, whereas male anatomy is just very crude and is almost non-existent throughout the book. And so I feel kind of disconnected from it because of that, because it's trying to tell an amazing story, but the way that it's conveying that is gross at times, and I don't really know how to deal with that. I feel conflicted about it. Yeah, so 3.5 stars for Habibi. I'll probably reread it at some point and try and pin down more about how I feel about it, because I'm really unsure. I don't know if my criticisms of it, like right now, I feel like they're valid. I'm not sure if they're valid enough to make me dislike the book completely, or if the story that is here is good enough to overcome those shortcomings. I don't know. Okay, but now we're more into the books that I enjoyed. Even though I enjoyed aspects of these ones, these are the ones that I have much fewer criticisms about. The first one we're going to talk about is Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. Very good. There are some absolutely gorgeous passages in Shakespeare, in Julius Caesar. Every time I read Shakespeare, it takes me a little bit to get back into back into the language of it, but when I do, like, it just flows so beautifully. And the story of William Shakespeare is really interesting, like the betrayal that he went through, and the political intrigue around that is really interesting, and I like it a lot. And it kind of revitalized my interest in the Roman Empire, and I'd like to read some more history about it because of this book. It still doesn't quite break the 4-star barrier for me. It's still 3.5, but it's close. Then we have How to Think by Alan Jacobs. And this book was a reread. I've read it like 3 times now, I think. Maybe 4. And each time I read it, it gets a little less good. Not because it doesn't get less good, it gets less impactful on me, because I've grown so much. When I first read it when I was 18 or 19, it absolutely blew my mind and changed the way that I think. But as I've internalized that message and grown even more, it's, it still has many good reminders to me, because the topic of thinking critically is something that you always have to consciously be doing, because there's so many little pitfalls that we fall into, and tribalism, rationality, bias, all these different things that we fall into, that you have to be consciously aware of it. But when I read this book, although it is good reminders, it's not like there's nothing new here for me. And I've read other books, one of which we'll get to in a little bit, on similar topics that are so much more in depth. Like, this feels very beginner level to me. And so it's not really anything more than a good reminder, like I said. But I still really appreciate what it did for me when I did read it. It was so impactful for me. It's written by a Christian, but it gave me the permission I felt to really explore atheism, which is something that I didn't feel like I could do, because I grew up super conservative Christian, and it felt like a betrayal of who I was to really give any other kind of belief system any real thought until I read this book. So I really appreciate it for that, and it has a special place in my heart for that. But it's just not as impactful as it once was for me. So still 3.5 stars. And then We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I think I'm saying that right. Very skinny book. It's her TED Talk that she did in book form. So you could just look up her TED Talk on YouTube. It's very short, very good, very powerful for what it is. It's basically just talking about her life experience in, I forget which country she's from, but basically it's just talking about her experience and what she went through living in a very anti-feminist country, and the ways that she was subjugated because of that. She wasn't even allowed to book a hotel room by herself because her man needed to come do that for her, and she didn't have one, so she couldn't get one. And lots of different experiences like that just, it's such a simple and elegant argument for feminism that it really makes it hard for me to believe why people why some people are so anti-feminist. It's not some kind of revolutionary text that's groundbreaking, but it's just very personal and very emotive, and I don't get how you could read this and still be okay with anti-feminist positions. It just baffles my mind. So 4 stars for We Should All Be Feminist. Next we have Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. Very cozy, very nice. Not too many twists and turns. There is some action in here. It's a cozy fantasy about our main character, Triss, I think her name is, and her basically, she was an adventurer and she's trying to settle down and just start a coffee shop in a little town. and the struggles that she goes through trying to do that. Like I said, there is some action in here. It's not completely like devoid of plot, but like even though the stakes are there, they're pretty low, and like you never really feel too strongly that things are just gonna fall apart, and like nobody's ever like it never feels like everybody's just gonna lose and the world's gonna crumble. The stakes are much lower than that. Oh goodness. As I go along in this video, I feel like I'm getting worse and worse at describing books. That's something I need to improve on a little bit. But yeah, the characters and their relationships between each other are very nice. The descriptions about the coffee shop and the desire to settle down, like, it's very cozy. It does its job very well. It's nothing like completely groundbreaking. Like, I don't think anything like this would ever contend for like some of my favorite books ever. But for what it is, and especially if you're in the right headspace for it, it is a very pleasing read. So 4 stars for Legends and Lattes. Then we have The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin. This was my first Le Guin book, and I liked it. It was very good. I thought that the world was very interesting, and the character dynamics, I loved them. They're very, very good, and the plot itself is very good. It's a science fiction book about a man who his dreams change reality, and so he goes to see a shrink to like basically try to stop dreaming. And then the shrink gets some ideas of his own, and the things that he does throughout the book with the power that he's unlocking through his patient is very cool, very interesting, and it feels much more like highbrow science fiction. It wasn't like mind-blowing or anything, but it feels like a much more in-depth exploration of the topic than something that's more like science fantasy would offer, and I liked that a lot, and so I'm looking forward to reading a lot more of Ursula K. Le Guin, and more just like philosophical science fiction in general. So 4 stars for The Lathe of Heaven. Then we had The Little Prince by Anthony de Saint-Exupéry. Yeah, let's go with that. This was so incredibly sweet and touching in the ways that is basically just about about a boy who's exploring the world full of adults and their worries and things that they think are so important, and just how in conflict they are with the things that this little boy values. Like I said, it's very sweet, but at the same time, unlike Legends and Lattes, which is just, a feel-good, cozy story, this I actually feel like is making really good points, and like things that I so often forget. Sometimes I just get really concerned about matters of consequence, but they don't matter in the grand scheme of things. So often I neglect the simple things that in the end are going to mean so much more to me. Yeah, so 4 stars for The Little Prince. Then we have It's Okay to Be Angry About Capitalism by our good man, Bernie Sanders. First of all, this is not meant to be a political channel, but I just wish that we were living in the timeline where Bernie won in 2016. I think that would be a much better timeline. I'm going to continue reading a lot of political books, and I'm going to discuss what I thought about them, but this is not meant to be a political channel. But I think that Bernie makes so many good points in here about how the system of capitalism is just failing America and the American people. It's a little bit surface level, it's meant to be very approachable for anyone who picks it up, And it was a little bit too much about his campaigns for my taste. I wish he got more into the weeds about things. But at the same time, it was just very good to see from his perspective how all of that went down. I just wish that it was a little bit less of the book and he talked more like economic philosophy, I guess. But yeah, it was very good, very refreshing. 4 stars for It's Okay to Be Angry About Capitalism. Ooh, I'm having a hard time describing all these things. I don't know what's going on with me. Freedom is a constant struggle. I was struggling to remember the exact name of this book by Angela Davis. This book is a lot of things. Is a collection of interviews and speeches that she gave at different like college campuses mostly, on a whole bunch of different topics, and it was very impactful for me. Like the themes of solidarity between these movements were my main takeaway from this book. And I'm reading another book by her right now, Women, Race, and Class, and the themes of solidarity are very strong in that one too. The main thing that I didn't like about this book was because it's just a collection of different speeches and interviews she's given. There's not as much of a through line. Like it feels like a whole bunch of different pieces pushed together that don't quite fit right. Still a very good message, and you can learn a lot from it, and I would absolutely recommend it. It just doesn't flow nearly as well as the one that I'm reading from her right now, and so it was a little disjointed feeling because of that. But still, the things that she talks about in here and the ways that she talks about them, very important and very impactful. I'm still gonna give it 4 stars. I'm not quite at 4.5 territory yet. Maybe on a different day I could be convinced, but not today. We're getting near the end. I'm gonna go take a nap after this. I don't know why this is exhausting me so much, but it really is. Red Rising by Pierce Brown, the first book in the Red Rising trilogy. When I was reading this, absolutely adored it. I flew through it. This was before I really realized how formulaic and kind of cheap the writing style in Pierce Brown's books are. At least in the 3 that I've read. I can't speak about anything else, of course. I think if I reread this, I wouldn't like it nearly as much. I still think it's really good, and I really enjoyed the plot and the themes of it. I didn't really catch on to some of the more popular criticisms of it, mainly like the treatment of women in it and how they're basically sidelined to being obstacles in the way. I didn't really notice that very much because I was just so wrapped up in the action and the tribal intrigue that was going on in it. But that's dealt with for the most part in the second book, and it gets even better in the second book. But yeah, very good, and I'd still recommend it. Just know that it's formulaic with its twists and turns, and not the best when it comes to representation of women. So, 4 stars for Red Rising. I think I originally gave it 5 stars when I first read it, but I've definitely come down a long ways since then. The Misinformation Age by Callan O'Connor and James Owen Weatherall. This is a very good book about all the way that science can go wrong. Even like good science with good intentions and good methodology can get swayed to come to the wrong scientific consensus when you take in for all the other data that's coming in. It's a very big picture book about how, like I said, in the best case scenarios, science can come to the wrong conclusion, and then so many different ways that bad actors can come in and manipulate it even further, and all the struggles that come with that, and how we can reduce it, but also just how it's inherently vulnerable, and we need to consciously be at guard about these things. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it. It's an easy enough read that I think anybody could get through it without too much trouble, but it also is in-depth enough that there's, even though it's a kind of slim book, there's enough meat on the bones that you can really chew on and feel like you're coming away with a good understanding. Yeah, so 4.5 stars for The Misinformation Age. Then we had Unfollow by Megan Phelps Roper. This was a very impactful book for me. Like I said, I grew up conservative Christian, and Megan Phelps Roper, she grew up in the Westboro Baptist Church, which is basically a hate movement. It's very anti-gay, a lot of different things. But mainly known for being anti-gay, like God hates fags is like their main thing. Like they'd put it on signs and go picket around towns, and they'd picket military funerals and a whole bunch of different other just really distasteful stuff in the name of religion. And this book is her story about growing up in there and how, you know, she thought that what she believed was justified, and how over time she came to realize how horrible what she used to believe is, and you know, how she dealt with that and how she changed and grew through that, in part through the kindness of an internet stranger. It was very touching and very impactful to me. I didn't grow up in, like, Westboro Baptist Church is essentially a cult. I didn't grow up in a cult. I grew up just in a, like, normal Baptist church. But at the same time, there were a lot of similarities. Not anything nearly as strong as what she went through, but just a lot of different emotional barriers that she had to work through that I, in a more minor extent, can relate to. So yeah, 4.5 stars for Unfollow. Then we have Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Very good science fiction book. This is a book about a astronaut who wakes up on a spaceship, and he's lost his memory. He has amnesia, and he has to basically just figure out why he's there and what's going on, and accomplish the mission while he's regaining his memories. Yeah, that's as much as I want to spoil, but it is such a good ride. It's very much pop science fiction, but at the same time, it's a very good story, and I think that a lot of the, you know, science in it is super interesting to me, as well as just being like very approachable too. The things that I love about it so much are all spoilers, so I don't really want to get into any of those because I didn't know about any of them, and I think that that's part of the reason why I loved it so much. 4.5 stars. I'm not quite at 5-star territory yet, but yeah, 4.5 stars. Golden Sun by Pierce Brown, the second book in the Red Rising trilogy. This fixes a lot of the problems that the first book had in the way that it dealt with female characters. And it felt a little less predictable and less cheap than the third one. I think it's the best of both worlds, where you get a lot of action and a lot of intrigue, and it's still a real page turner, but it didn't feel as formulaic or as like twists just for the sake of twists as the third one did. Still 4.5 stars, so we're not in 5-star territory yet, even though I did definitely give it 5 stars when I first read it. The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Anyway, this is the other book that I was talking about in conjunction with How to Think. This one's all about why good people are divided by politics and religion. It's about the ways that thinking is a lot more complex than we normally think that it is. The main theory in the book is he gives his theory of thinking as the mind is an elephant, and the part of the mind that we're conscious of, rationality, the part that feels like we're thinking, is like a rider on the elephant, and the rider has to serve the elephant Wow, it's getting really windy. Because, like, the elephant's just going to go wherever it goes. And then the writer is just like, yeah, we actually needed to go that way for this and that reason. You know, just basically coming up with a reason to explain why the elephant is doing what it's doing. He's basically arguing that rationality is a lot less rational than we like to think that it is. And that, like, we make a lot of the decisions subconsciously and then just go along with them anyway, trying to justify them after the fact. And I think he makes a really compelling case. A big thing that I also took away from this book was the moral foundations theory, which is, he basically tries to sum up the gap in political morality between people on the left and people on the right. He basically says that people on the left care a lot more about fairness and reducing harm. Those are the left's moral foundations, and then the right's moral foundations are much more broad. There's a lot more different pillars that they're based off of. They're partially based off of fairness and harm reduction, but they're also based off of things like sanctity, not political, but like societal stability, as well as a couple others that he talks about in here. And that really shifted how I think about political divides a lot more. Because just other people think of these things a lot differently than I do. And getting to think, or getting to like kind of see how other people could think about these things really opened my mind to being more patient and understanding about my own views and how much lighter I have to hold them. 4.5 stars, though. I don't know why. I just don't feel okay giving it 5. I wrote a lot of notes about that one when I first read it. So I feel like I could, if I were to revisit those notes, I could give a much more succinct, in-depth explanation of what the book was about instead of just kind of the vibes that I took away from it. But that's not what I'm doing here. I'm just giving vibes right now. So, first 5-star read, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This book was amazing. I didn't read it in high school because I didn't read anything in high school, which is kind of the reason why I was drawn to this, because it's one that's often assigned, or maybe not even in high school, but in middle school as well. I don't know, but because I was homeschooled. But visiting this one for the first time as an adult, it was so touching. Like, just through the eyes of this little girl growing up and witnessing, these things happening to people in her town, and like the different way that people are treated and how she doesn't really understand why that is, and like seeing her father deal with things in the way that he deals with, and her coming to realize why that is. Very impactful, very good story, just incredibly well written. Definitely a 5-star read, and I am so grateful that I read it when I did. I do not think I would have appreciated this if I had read it sooner in life, or at least much sooner in life. And then my favorite book of the year, I don't know, To Kill a Mockingbird and this book that I'm about to talk about, like, I go back and forth on them so much. This is a nonfiction book. It's a memoir by Tara Westover, Educated. It's a very popular book. It's about Tara Westover growing up in the mountains in a Mormon family. Is it Mormon? I think it's Mormon. And basically how her family was a miniature monoculture cult. And the abuse that she went through her family, in trying to seek education, as well as just like personal relationships in her family, and the struggles that she went through. and she eventually goes off to school and seeks an education, and is at a huge disadvantage because of that, as well as just like the emotional and religious trauma that she has to go through as she's going to college, and how much she has to adjust to the world outside, and why this was partially so impactful to me. I mean, of course, it's just a good story on its own, but again, like going through being homeschooled and like being very sheltered in what I was able to think growing up. I think that that's why this had such an impact on me. Not that I had any experiences anywhere near to the level that Tara Westover did. It still stayed with me very strongly. And also gave me a new appreciation for my parents. Because Tara's parents, although like I don't think that they were trying to be bad parents, they were just awful to her, and gave her so much baggage. And my parents, growing up, I thought that they were worse than they were. They of course weren't perfect, no parents are, but they really tried, and they really did love me, and they gave me space when I needed space to explore my own beliefs. And although they still disagree with where I've landed, they accept me for who I am. And I didn't realize how big that was for me until I read this book. It really changed how much I appreciated my parents. And that's a big reason why I love it as much as I did. So yeah, that's the books I read. There might be like one or two that I forgot to bring it out here. I didn't feel right putting it in these stacks because I didn't feel right about ranking it, but I forgot to bring it out because of that. The 100-Year War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi. I can't believe I almost forgot about it. I'm not going to rank it because it just feels wrong to rank a book with everything that's been going on the subject matter of the Israel-Palestine conflict. But it is such a good history of the Palestinian people and everything that they went through over the last 100 years, or a little bit more than 100 years, because it came out in 2017. So eye-opening about the struggle of the Palestinian people, and I would very, very highly recommend reading it if you want to know more about Palestinian history. Definitely a 5-star read. I feel wrong ranking it with these books, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that as something that is very well worth reading. So yeah, that's what I read. It was less than I read in 2023, but I'm still very happy with how much I was able to get through, and the impact that the books I read had on me. Very satisfied with that. Yeah, I think my next video will probably be about my reading goals for 2025. And I've already finished a few books. I don't know exactly when I'll talk about them, but I'm looking forward to talking about them as well. Also, I just started annotating books. Women Racing Class is the first one that I'm tabbing them. I'm not like writing in them, so I don't know if that quite counts. But if I continue with that, I'd also be interested about talking about that in the future. And then also, I just finished Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, and that was amazing, and I really want to talk about that one soon. So I think that, especially since I have this space where I can come out here and be in private, I think that I'll finally be able to be a little bit more consistent. I'm still not gonna commit to any kind of schedule, but I think that I'll be able to be consistent for the first time in a long while. And I'm very much looking forward to that, because I've missed being able to talk about books, and I feel like I've gotten really rusty at it too. Not that I was ever great at it, but just coming up with descriptions of all these books was very challenging for me. And like I said, it's never been something that I'm particularly good at, but I feel like I should be better at it than I was today. But anyway, I needed to get this out so I can move on to other topics of interest on this channel. So yeah, that's all I have to talk about for now. Thank you for watching. If you're still here, subscribe if you'd like more of this rambly stuff. I don't think anything that I produce in the near future is going to be nearly this long. But yeah, subscribe if you'd like to hang around for more. And if you have different books or different booktubers to recommend to me, I would absolutely love that, because I've been struggling to find different booktubers that I can watch. I'm finding a lot that I like one or two videos from, but I just think I really need them to have a very similar reading interest to like most of their stuff and to like really dive into them. Yeah, so that's all I have to say on today's video. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.